All right, in today's episode, I have a question from Bowen Bergenfield, and he's asking when it comes to saving over a longer period of time for a larger purchase, whether that be a house, a car, or even a big vacation, is it better to invest that money or to put it in a high yield savings account or something similar? And so I get this question all the time. And so this is a great question, Bowen. And I'm going to break this down and I'm going to show facts and share some numbers to really illustrate my point. If I were to ask the question, or if you were to ask me the question, where would I put my money if I were to save for a big purchase? The first question I would ask back to you would say, how long until this purchase is going to happen? So, for example, you brought up a house, you brought up a car, and you brought up a big vacation. I would assume a big vacation in a car for sure, or within a 5-year period. I would assume a house would likely be within a 5-year period, but also could definitely be a longer term thing where you're planning for 7 years or 10 years or whatnot, right? And so for anything that's a 5-year savings goal or less, and so use this as a rule of thumb, anything that is going to be saved for 5 years or less, it could be a house, it could be a car, it could be a home, all the time, 100% of the time, I'm putting that in a high yield savings account without question. For anything over and above 5 years, I'm going to consider investing that money in a taxable brokerage account with a low cost index fund or ETF. So from a pure answer standpoint, so you can listen to this podcast, get the answer and understand it and run if you need to. That's the short answer of why. Now I'm going to break down the actual reasoning behind this. And so this is based on data. This is based on facts and numbers and just factual data. So I'm going to pull this up. And so my team can put this on the screen as well, but I'll walk you through this. So the S&P 500 index historical risk and return from 1926 to 2024. So just about 100 years, just shy of 100 years. Your time period for investing in the S&P 500 is very, very favorable from anything over 5 years. Anything below 5 years, like a 1-year period, a 2-year period, a 3-year period, there is a lot of risk with that. And I think this is the context that people need to hear when investing in index funds is a safe route, because there is a lot of volatility. So you have to understand what safe means and the context behind that. So we can show on this exact 98-year period, time periods of 1 year the ranges in a 1-year period could be from a negative 43% return all the way up to a 54% return. So imagine if you had $100,000 for this house, and in that 1-year period, the market dipped 30%. You would lose $30,000. Would that be worth it? Would that be worth the risk of potential gain, which could go the opposite way and you could get a 25% return? Is it worth it at that point in time? I would argue no, because there's a lot of volatility within a 1-year period. And if it turns out bad, you're going to have to, foot the bill somehow, somewhere. So the $100 during that period became, obviously in this situation, if it was a 43% loss, 44-ish, $43 or 43.3%, it would be $100 turning to $56. So again, my example from 100 to 70, thousand. And then if it was the best case year, which is 54%, it would have turned from 100 to 154. So 26 of the 99 years that we're assessing, 98, I guess 99, would be negative returns. So therefore, 26% of the time, 1 in 4 chances that it's going to go in the negative direction, which for me is not worth the risk. That's a pretty sizable risk. Now, as you get, in bigger time gaps of holding your individual, S&P 500 fund, that range will drop. Also, the positive years will increase. So in any 2-year period, we went from negative 35% to up to 41%. And there were 16 of the 98 years, or 16% of negative returns. Therefore, we went from, initially 74% positive returns in the 1 year to now we're at 84%, up 10% in the positive years over that exact same time span. So this is a sizable adjustment, but still doesn't give me like that much confidence, because I still have a 16% chance of loss. Now, my 3-year gap, it again gets smaller and shrinks, which is now 27%, negative 27% to 31%. So my $100 could become $38 to $225. So that gap is changing with time, with the bigger swings in timing. 15 of 97 years were negative returns. Therefore, we're still about 85%. If I flip forward to 5 years, you have essentially 90% of the time you are going to be in the positive. So that means you have a 10% chance of going negative, but over a 5-year period, anything greater than that, you are above a 90% chance to succeed. And that's why I would then take it over into the brokerage or consider at that point in time. If you're at that 6-year gap, it's something to consider, obviously, and it depends what your level of risk and risk tolerance are. But once you get to the 10, 15, 20, there's actually 0% chance that you lose money. So over 15-year gaps, and essentially there's zero negative return. So any 15-year gap you look at, any 20-year gap you look at, there's zero negative return. So you might not have a great return. It could be 1%, but you have no chance of losing money based on history. Now, that does not mean the future is going to hold true, but based on history, you will not lose money anything above 15 years. So 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40-year gaps, 0 times did any of those gaps lose money. And so when I think about the numbers, I think about how to answer this question. So when we go back to the initial question, is like saving for a car or a big vacation or a house, I think most of those things are within 5 years. And so therefore that 5-year gap's that pretty pivotal moment where the probability shifts very favorably in your direction if you were to invest over 5 years, period. So if I had a 10-year goal for something, I would definitely be investing personally. But anything below 5 years, I always use a high yield savings account. I can speak from experience right now. We just were saving up for a new down payment. High yield savings account was exactly where we used it. We use Ally Savings Bank. I don't really have a preference, to be honest. They all kind of stink. And they're not wealth builders anyway, and they're not intended to be wealth builders. They're literally just to be able to pace inflation. You're not even beating inflation net of tax. So the high yield savings account isn't like a great tool to use. It's a tool nonetheless. It's a tool I will use, but it does not get me excited by any means or any stretch of the imagination. So when I answer the question, Bowen, when I think is it better to invest that money or put in a high yield savings account or something similar, I would say always a high yield savings account. The other things you might want to consider, if you know the time period is at least like 3 years, you could consider like a CD or a more short term in nature type of alternative. I have done this with a business account before. This wasn't on the personal side, but I knew I had money set aside for taxes. And I knew exactly when I owed those, obviously April of the following year. And so therefore, when I made money in Q1, what I did is I started saving that money into my CDs within my business bank account. So I would at least make money on the money that was going to go to Uncle Sam anyway and get ahead of the curve. But that was a very one-off situation. Other than that, I stay with high yield savings accounts on the personal side. But I hope that helps you kind of think through this question with actual numbers. And I think this will make your life a lot easier, but also just simplify it and don't try to always beat the market or always try to do some crazy stuff. There is no need to do that, especially when you have a short-term savings goal. Just take care of your goal. Make sure that you map out exactly that total amount. Let's say it's $12,000 over a 12-month span, and then just back into that monthly amount, which would be obviously $1,000 a month in this example. So hopefully that helps you, and I will see everybody next week.
You've been listening to Money on My Mind with your host, Brendan Schlagbaum. If you found value in today's discussion, share it with someone who could benefit from it too. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, so you never miss a money mastery tip. Until next time, stay passionate about your financial journey and keep taking bold steps towards your money goals.